All right, let's dive into something a little different today.
Different, how so?
Well, we're tackling leadership, but not the typical, climb the ladder, crush the competition kind of stuff.
I see where you're going with this.
We're looking at The Mentor Leader, a book by Nathan Whitaker.
Oh yeah, the NFL guy. Didn't he work with Tony Dungy?
That's right, and even mentored Michael Vick, so he's been in the trenches dealing with some pretty high pressure situations.
High stakes, for
Yeah.
sure. But how does that translate to leadership outside of, professional sports?
That's what's so interesting about this book. It's not about winning at all costs, it's about something much deeper. It's about building up other people, not just yourself.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So less about personal gain, more about empowering others.
Exactly. And it poses this really challenging question. What if, and this is a wild thought, what if true leadership meant achieving great success but receiving zero credit for it?
Wow, that's a tough one to swallow, especially in a world that's so focused on individual achievement.
Right. It's like the opposite of seeking the spotlight. It's about shining that light on others, helping them grow and reach their full potential.
So we're talking about a different definition of success here, not just hitting those short-term goals, but something with a much longer-term impact.
Exactly. Think of it like planting a tree. A mentor leader is focused on cultivating something that will bear fruit for years to come, even if they're not around to harvest it.
Okay, I like that analogy. So it's less about the immediate win and more about creating a lasting legacy.
Exactly. He uses the example of Chuck Noll, the legendary coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Think about it. The Steelers, they became a dynasty, but Noll himself, he wasn't this like flashy celebrity coach.
Yeah, he wasn't exactly making the rounds on talk shows.
Right. He focused on building up his players, creating a system that would outlast his own tenure. And it worked, obviously.
So it's that shift from what's in it for me to how can I best serve others? That's a pretty radical idea in a world that's so often obsessed with, getting ahead.
It is radical. And it requires a level of self-awareness that honestly can be pretty uncomfortable. Whitaker doesn't shy away from the fact that we all carry baggage.
Baggage. You mean like emotional baggage?
Yeah, past experiences, hurts, insecurities, all that stuff that we tend to lug around with us. He's really open about his own struggles with this, and he argues that before you can lead others effectively, you got to deal with your own stuff first.
So like clear the runway before you try to take off kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He uses this great analogy of checking your emotional baggage at the airport. It makes the journey a whole lot smoother.
I get the analogy, but how do we actually do that? It's not like we can just hand over our past hurts at a baggage counter.
Right. It's not a literal thing, but it points to the need for some serious self-reflection, for acknowledging those things that might be weighing us down. And he's a big believer in forgiveness, both of ourselves and others.
So facing our past, clearing out that emotional baggage, it's about creating space for more effective leadership. But how does that translate into, actually leading people? What are the practical steps?
Well, he tackles the whole strengths and weaknesses thing, but in a way that, I'll admit, surprised me. He suggests that instead of obsessing over our weaknesses, we double down on our strengths.
Wait, so he's saying don't worry about fixing what we're bad at.
Not exactly. He's saying find what you're good at, what you're naturally gifted at, and become even better.
Makes sense. Play to your strengths, right? But what about those areas where maybe we're not so strong?
That's where it gets interesting. He says surround yourself with people who have different strengths than you do. Fill in the gaps, create a team where everyone brings something unique to the table.
Ah, I see. So it's like building a dream team, where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
He uses the example of Peyton Manning and Reggie Wayne. Now, on paper, they might have seemed like a total mismatch. Manning, the quarterback, all about meticulous planning, intense focus, and Wayne, the wide receiver, was more, raw talent instinct.
Yeah, they had very different styles, very different personalities.
But they formed this incredible partnership and they dominated the game together. Why? Because they recognized and leaned into their individual strengths. Wayne even said, I didn't have to be Peyton. Peyton didn't have to be me, but we had to have a common ground of being great.
Okay, I love that. Common ground of being great. But what about that foundation, that common ground? What does Whitaker say is the bedrock of a truly successful mentor leader?
He starts with something that might seem obvious, but honestly, it's often missing these days: integrity. He doesn't mince words here. He says it's absolutely non-negotiable.
Integrity, meaning doing the right thing even when it's hard.
It's about being trustworthy, being someone people can rely on. If you're going to build people up, they need to know that you're the real deal, that your actions align with your words. He says, a mentor leader underestimates the power of character at his or her own peril.
So it's not just about being a nice person, it's about being a trustworthy leader. And that builds into his next point, right? Security and confidence.
You got it. Not in an arrogant way, but in a way that allows you to empower others to share information freely without feeling threatened. True mentor leaders are secure enough to celebrate the wins of their team, even if it means less attention for themselves.
That's a tough one, isn't it? To be genuinely happy for someone else's success, especially if you played a part in it, it's almost counterintuitive.
It is. And that leads to another key quality he talks about, which is, well, just being real, being authentic. He calls it genuineness.
Okay, so no putting on a fake leadership persona.
People can spot a fake a mile away, right? If you're trying to be someone you're not, it'll undermine your ability to connect with others and build those genuine relationships that are at the heart of mentor leadership.
So it's about being comfortable in your own skin, bringing your whole self to the table.
And letting that authenticity shine through in your interactions with others, because ultimately, that's what people are drawn to.
It's about connection, right?
Yeah.
Building those authentic relationships that allow people to flourish.
He then goes on to talk about accountability, but he defines it in a really interesting way. It's not just about taking responsibility for your actions. It's about being willing to protect those you lead, even if it means taking the blame yourself.
Wow, that's a high bar.
Yeah.
Taking the hit for your team.
He tells this incredible story about General Eisenhower. Before D-Day, he wrote this note, accepting full responsibility if the mission failed. Talk about taking ownership.
Makes you think about how quick we are to point fingers these days.
It does, and it highlights the difference between leadership that's focused on self-preservation and leadership that's focused on the well-being of others. Alongside accountability, he emphasizes the importance of being accessible, being approachable.
So creating an environment where people feel comfortable coming to you with their questions, their ideas, even their struggles.
He actually tells this story about an assistant principal who made a huge difference in the lives of his students just by being present and interested during lunchtime.
Wow. Just showing up and being present can have that much of an impact.
It's not about having a fancy title or a big platform. It's about being there for people in those seemingly ordinary moments.
He even says every interaction is an opportunity for impact. It's like a constant ripple effect.
Exactly. He talks about how he was unknowingly mentoring a younger athlete who just admired him from afar. You never know who's watching, who you might be influencing, just by being yourself and doing what you love.
That's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
It's a good reminder that we're all leaving a legacy, whether we realize it or not.
So the question is, what kind of legacy do we want to leave? What kind of impact do we want to have on the world?
And that's where mentor leadership comes in. It's about choosing to make a difference in the lives of others, even in the smallest of ways. It really makes you think about, the impact we have on others, even when we're not trying to be a mentor.
It's like that old saying, you can be the ripest, juiciest peach in the world.
And there will still be someone who hates peaches.
Exactly. You're not going to connect with everyone, but your actions, the way you carry yourself, it's going to resonate with someone.
And he really emphasizes that age shouldn't be a barrier to mentorship. He talks about how growing up, he was actually mentored by an older teenager.
Someone who saw his potential, I guess.
Yeah, this guy encouraged his love of sports and completely changed his perspective on who could be a mentor. It wasn't some, gray-haired sage. It was just another kid who was a little further down the road.
It's a good reminder that we can learn from anyone, regardless of their background. Everyone's got a story, right? Everyone has something to teach.
He also makes this point that, not everyone will have the same impact as a mentor, and that's okay.
We're not all meant to be Tony Dungy or Oprah, right?
Exactly. We each have our own unique gifts, our own platforms. Some are bigger, some are smaller.
But all equally important. He uses this analogy of the body of Christ. Each part is different, but essential for the whole thing to function.
Love that analogy. It takes the pressure off. It's not about comparing yourself to others or trying to have the biggest platform.
It's about being faithful with what you've been given.
Right.
Using your own unique talents and experiences to make a difference, however that looks for you.
And that brings us to one of the most, I think, challenging aspects of mentor leadership. The long game.
The long game, huh?
Yeah, Whitaker says mentor leaders, they think about time differently. They're not just focused on the next win, the next promotion, this quarterly report.
They're playing chess, not checkers.
Exactly. He compares it to building a team through the draft versus making those flashy trades for big-name players.
So it's about building a foundation, a system that's going to last.
One is about sustainable success. The other is often about chasing headlines and hoping for the best.
And that long-term thinking, it's all tied into his idea of what he calls good success, isn't it?
He's not talking about, just the typical markers of success like money or fame.
Right. It's got to be something deeper, something more meaningful.
He quotes his friend James Brown, who defines good success as making a difference in the lives of others. It's about having a real, lasting impact on the people you touch.
Okay, so shifting our focus from accomplishments to impact. But that takes a lot of faith, doesn't it? I mean, believing in something bigger than yourself, especially when you don't see immediate results.
He brings up the example of the Apostle Paul, right? This guy faced incredible hardship, imprisonment, persecution, but he never wavered in his commitment to his mission.
It's about staying the course, trusting the process, even when things get tough.
He calls it long obedience in the same direction. It's that consistent effort over time that really makes a difference.
And to keep moving in that direction, to stay on track, you need a roadmap, right? A clear sense of where you're going.
He's big on having a defined vision, mission, and values. And not just for yourself, but for your team, for your organization.
So it's not just about having a personal vision board. It's about creating a shared vision that everyone can buy into.
He talks about how Tony Dungy did this with the Indianapolis Colts. It wasn't just about Dungy's vision for the team. It was about creating a culture where everyone, from the players to the staff, felt ownership of that vision.
So it's about making that vision contagious. It's got to be something people are excited about, something they want to be a part of.
And from that shared vision, from that common ground, that's where he says real service can flow. He talks a lot about the idea of servant leadership.
Yeah, that's a term that gets thrown around a lot, but I think it's often misunderstood.
People think it means being passive, being a pushover, but it's actually the opposite. It's about empowering others. It's about putting the needs of your team above your own ego, your own desire for recognition.
So less me and more we.
Exactly. He roots his understanding of servant leadership in the model that, Jesus provided.
Oh, wow. Okay, so bringing it back to the source.
It's radical, really, turning the traditional leadership pyramid upside down. But he argues that it's the most effective, the most fulfilling way to lead.
Okay, but to lead that way, to really embody that servant leadership, you've got to have a certain level of maturity, right? A willingness to look inward, to do some serious self-reflection.
There's that self-awareness again. He's big on this.
It comes up over and over again throughout the book, doesn't it? Understanding your motivations, your strengths, your weaknesses, the things that make you tick, the things that hold you back.
He's super honest about his own journey here, He admits that kind of self-examination can be painful, it can be uncomfortable.
It's easier to just, power through, ignore the hard stuff.
Right. But he argues that it's absolutely essential if you want to grow as a leader, as a person. He says you can't pour into others from an empty cup. You can't give what you don't have.
It's like that oxygen mask on the airplane, right? Take care of yourself first, then you can help others.
And he's a big proponent of facing your past. The good, the bad, the ugly, all of it.
He even compares it to carrying around all this heavy luggage. It'll slow you down, keep you from moving forward.
And this is where forgiveness comes in, he says.
Forgiveness, like forgiving yourself for past mistakes.
Yeah, forgiving yourself, forgiving others. It's about letting go of that bitterness, that resentment that can just eat away at you. He talks about how incredibly hard it is, but how liberating it is when you finally do. It's like, taking off those heavy chains and finally being able to breathe.
Wow, okay, that's powerful. So this inner work, this maturity, it's not just about feeling better, it's about becoming a better leader.
Exactly. It's about getting your own house in order so that you can create a space for others to thrive.
So finding that balance, right? Taking care of yourself so you can effectively care for others.
He's honest about how hard that can be, especially in a world that's constantly on, constantly demanding our attention.
It's easy to get caught up in the hustle, to feel like you always have to be doing more, achieving more.
But he's adamant that it's crucial for avoiding burnout. He even shares a story about a time when he almost quit coaching altogether because he was just so burnt out, so depleted.
Really? He almost walked away from the NFL.
Yeah, he was at a breaking point.
Yeah.
And it was that experience that made him realize how important it was to prioritize his own well-being.
That's a good reminder for all of us, I think. It's not selfish to take care of yourself. It's actually essential if you want to make a lasting impact.
And it's from that foundation of self-awareness, balance, and this deep commitment to serving others that he moves into, the nitty-gritty of how to actually be a mentor leader. He breaks it down into what he calls marks of a mentor leader.
Marks, like what to look for or what to cultivate in yourself if you want to be that kind of leader.
Both. He groups them into three categories: trustworthy traits, leadership attributes, and relational qualities. It's kind of like he's giving us a blueprint.
A blueprint for building that kind of leadership that's going to leave a legacy.
And he starts with the foundation,
Mhm.
character. He doesn't beat around the bush. He says it's the glue that holds everything together.
Makes sense. Can't really build trust without integrity, right?
He tells this story about his college coach, Cal Stoll. His
Mhm.
guy, he was all about building men of character.
So it wasn't just about winning games. It was about shaping the lives of these young men, helping them develop into, you know, good human beings.
He believed that character was the key to success, both on and off the field.
And that focus on character, that's where those other trustworthy traits come in, right? He talks
Yeah.
about integrity, security, and authenticity
Yeah.
being the real deal, basically.
And he emphasizes that these qualities, they're absolutely essential for building trust with those you lead.
Because if you're not genuine, if you're putting on a show, people are going to see right through it.
Exactly. And that lack of authenticity, it erodes trust, it creates distance.
So it's about being real, being vulnerable, showing up as your true self. And he goes on to talk about leadership attributes, right? Things like courage, leading by example, keeping the vision front and center, exercising faith, even being willing to change paradigms.
And he's got some incredible stories to illustrate these points.
Like General Eisenhower's D-Day note, taking full responsibility for a mission that could have meant the loss of thousands of lives. Talk about having the weight of the world on your shoulders.
Or John Thompson, that Georgetown basketball coach,
Yeah.
walking his team off the court in protest after a racist remark was made by a fan. Talk about standing up for what you believe in, even when it costs you something.
It's about having the courage to do the right thing, even when it's hard, even when it's unpopular.
And he even gets really vulnerable here. He talks about his own struggles with accountability. He shares a story about a time when he made a decision that went against his gut and ended up hurting someone he cared about.
It's kind of refreshing, isn't it, to hear a leader admit that they don't always get it right?
It humanizes him. It makes him relatable. And it emphasizes that it's not about being perfect. It's about being willing to own your mistakes and learn from them.
And he circles back to this idea of leading by example over and over again. It's not enough to just talk the talk, you got to walk the walk.
People are watching.
Yeah.
They're paying attention to what you do, not just what you say.
And that ties into his emphasis on keeping the vision front and center, doesn't it? Reminding your team why they're doing what they're doing, especially when it gets tough.
He even compares it to, coaching a team through a losing streak.
Yeah.
You got to keep believing in the process, keep everyone focused on the goal, even when the wins aren't coming.
Because sometimes, you got to go through those tough times to get to the good stuff.
And that takes faith, right?
Mhm.
Believing that what you're doing matters, that it's going to pay off in the end, even when you don't see immediate results.
He talks about believing in the draft, even though it takes years to see if those young players are going to pan out. It's about trusting the process.
And that leads to his final point in this section, which is be willing to change paradigms.
Paradigm.
Those deeply held beliefs about how things should be done.
Got it. So being willing to change your mind.
He argues that mentor leaders, they're constantly learning, they're open to new ideas, new ways of doing things.
He tells this great story about how his players actually convinced him to cut back on off-season training. Now, that's a pretty radical idea for a coach, especially in a sport like football.
But he listened. He was willing to consider a different perspective. And it turned out to be the right decision. His players were healthier, they performed better, and they were happier.
So it's about being humble enough to admit that you don't have all the answers.
And being open to learning from the people around you, even if they're younger, even if they have less experience. Sometimes the best ideas come from the most unexpected sources.
And from these, foundational traits and attributes, he moves into what he calls relational qualities. It's about how mentor leaders connect with and build up those they lead.
This is where the rubber meets the road, right?
Yeah.
It's not enough to have these great qualities. You have to actually use them to build relationships with people.
It's about putting those traits and attributes into action.
He emphasizes the importance of accountability, accessibility, loyalty, shepherding your followers, and recognizing opportunities for impact, even in those seemingly small moments.
And he illustrates these points with some pretty powerful stories, like that story about General Eisenhower's D-Day note, where he takes full responsibility if the mission fails, even though thousands of lives are at stake.
He's contrasting this with the, all too common practice of leaders throwing others under the bus to save themselves. It's about taking ownership, even when it's hard, even when it might cost you something.
It's about putting the well-being of your team above your own self-preservation. And he also talks about, just being available, being approachable, creating an environment where people feel comfortable coming to you with their ideas, their concerns, their questions.
He tells a great story about an assistant principal who mentored students just by being present and interested during lunchtime, just by being there, listening, engaging with them.
It's a reminder that mentoring doesn't have to be this formal, structured program. It can happen in the most ordinary, everyday moments.
He even talks about how he was unknowingly mentoring a younger athlete just by being himself, by pursuing his passion with excellence. And that's a humbling thought, isn't it?
Yeah, that you can be making a difference in someone's life without even realizing it.
It's about recognizing the power of those everyday interactions
Yeah.
and realizing that those seemingly small moments can accumulate into a significant impact over time.
And being intentional with those interactions, seeing them as opportunities to make a difference, even in the most mundane settings.
Like his dad, who was a teacher in a segregated school. Instead of focusing on the injustice of the situation, he poured his energy into making a difference in the lives of his students.
What a powerful example.
And he talks about how his father's dedication had this ripple effect. It wasn't just about those students. It was about contributing to the long arc of progress, to making the world a little bit better.
It's a reminder that we all have a platform, we all have a sphere of influence, whether we realize it or not.
And it's about using that platform intentionally. It's about choosing to make a difference in the world, even if it's just in our own little corner of it.
So are we saying that everyone has the potential to be a mentor leader?
Absolutely. It's not about your title or your position. It's about your heart, your willingness to invest in others.
So what's the first step? How do we actually start living this out?
It really boils down to, are we willing to step outside of ourselves and see the people around us, see the opportunities to make a difference?
It's about shifting our focus from, what's in it for me to how can I serve others? How can I help someone else grow?
And he reminds us over and over again that everyone has a platform.
But he's not just talking about social media, right?
Yeah. No, he's talking about every interaction we have, every conversation, every encounter. It's all a chance to make an impact.
I love that story he tells about the assistant principal who mentored students just by being present and interested during lunchtime.
Right, just hanging out with kids, getting to know them, being a positive presence in their lives.
It wasn't a formal program or anything, just a genuine desire to connect, and it made a huge difference.
It's a good reminder that mentoring doesn't have to be this big, complicated thing.
We don't have to have it all figured out to make a difference in someone's life.
It can be as simple as listening, offering encouragement, sharing a bit of wisdom you've picked up along the way.
He even talks about how he was unknowingly mentoring a younger athlete just by being himself, by pursuing his passion with excellence.
And the crazy thing is, the kid had no idea. He was just watching, observing, taking it all in.
It really makes you think, doesn't it, about the impact we're having on the people around us, whether we realize it or not.
Our actions speak louder than words.
Absolutely. Thinking about it now, I can see how I've been mentored by so many people throughout my life. Teachers, coaches, friends, even family members.
People who saw something in you, maybe even before you saw it in yourself.
And encouraged you to grow, to step into your potential.
And that's the beauty of mentorship, isn't it? It's this reciprocal relationship. We all have something to learn from each other, regardless of age or experience.
He even challenges that traditional idea that, mentors need to be older and wiser than their mentees.
Like the wise old sage on the mountaintop.
Yeah, he tells a story about being mentored by an older teenager when he was growing up. It shifted his whole perspective on who could be a mentor.
Sometimes the best mentors are the ones who are just a few steps ahead of us on the path.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of mentor leadership, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from all of this?
I hope they feel empowered to step into their own role as mentor leaders, even in the smallest of ways.
Because it doesn't have to be this grand formal thing, right?
It could be as simple as reaching out to a colleague who's struggling, or offering to mentor a young person in your community, or just being more intentional about the way you interact with the people in your life.
It's about making that shift from what's in it for me to how can I make a difference?
And who knows? Maybe you'll spark a ripple effect that'll change the world.
It all starts with a single step.
Yeah.
So, to our listener, we leave you with this challenge. Who will you mentor today?